welcome to my channel. My name is Elizabeth, and for the ones new here on this channel, my goal is to make videos of my bike trips and other travel adventures to hopefully inspire you and also maybe help you with planning your own trip. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I prepare my bike trips. And in doing so, I will dive into the four main elements that are part of this preparation, which are 1. The route, 2. The accommodation, 3. The sightseeing part, and 4. The cost of such a trip. So, let's start. Let's first talk about the route. As a starter, as I am, I would highly recommend to plan your route in advance. Not only because it's less stressful to find your way on the route, but also because it's less time consuming. On the other hand, if you have a fixed route, you can also adjust it while biking, because you have this basic route you can lean on, which I find really nice. As having a route planned in advance makes me feel calm and also saves me a lot of time while biking. This is also highly personal because I also know there are people out there that just like the feeling of being completely free where to go. So this is really something that you should ask yourself, do you feel comfortable not having a fixed route in advance? Then definitely go for it. But I'm a person that likes to know in general where I'm going, so I can have that as a base. If you, like me, want to make a route in advance, there are of course multiple options to do so. The first one is the easiest one, and that is just to find a ready-made route online. If you, for example, want to bike to Berlin, you can just Google bike routes to Berlin and you get multiple options to choose from. So that's also an option I use often, also for smaller trips, for example, the one I did from Utrecht to Amsterdam. The second option is to make your own route. And of course this is more complicated, but it also gives you more freedom because you literally make your own route. I do this sometimes when I don't find a ready-made route online which I like. There are multiple sites that you can use for making your own route. I'll show some here, and I can also leave some in the description down below so you can check them out. Here I'm using a Dutch site which uses fietsknooppunten, which you can also find in other countries. But with just a simple Google making your own bike route, then there are a lot of sites coming up that you can use easily to make your own route within Europe. And I'm saying within Europe because I'm not sure how this works in other countries. The last option is to combine a ready-made route with a route that you made yourself. So that's also something I have done a couple of times. Is I, for example, like a part of the route I see online, but I want to extend it, or I feel like the end of the route that I found online is not something I like. So then I combine these two. Combining these two methods of course takes less time than making the whole route yourself. Which option is the best one for you of course depends on where you want to go. So that's the first question you should ask yourself. Have you already a destination in your mind, or are you totally blank and you should first dive into that? When asking the question, where do I want to go, it's important also to consider how long you have for your trip. Starting from the fact how long you have for this trip, it's important to look at how many kilometers you want and can bike on a day. If you, for example, want to bike 50 kilometers a day, you can multiply this with the amount of days you have, and then you know the length of the route you can look into. So this already helps to narrow down the routes that you can bike. However, if you like to bike a route that's more kilometers than you can cover in the amount of days you have, then you can also of course choose to take, for example, a train to cover some distance. So if you see a route you like, don't hesitate to explore these options. When deciding how many kilometers you want to bike each day, I recommend to not only look at your physical condition and how many kilometers you like to bike, but also to do some research. Because if you, for example, want to bike in an area where it's really hot at the time of the year you are going to bike there, or for example the route has a lot of height differences, then you can of course not bike as many kilometers as if it's very flat and not that hot. So these things are very good to look into before you plan your routes. So if I'm planning my trip and I already know where I want to go, I do some research online and read stories of other bikers. When you decided how long you want to go, where you want to go, and you already made your route for the trip, then it's time to think about the accommodation. Where are you going to sleep? Again, here I recommend to plan this in advance, as searching for a place to sleep is not a fun thing to do when biking, especially when you already biked for hours that day.
I haven't slept in 4 years.
The first question you may ask yourself is, what kind of accommodation type do you prefer? Is it a hostel or hotel, or for example a camping? Choosing your accommodation also depends, besides your preference, on your budget and also on the area that you're planning to bike in. The budget part is of course obvious. You cannot stay in hotels the whole time if your budget doesn't allow you to. However, the second element I mentioned, the area where you're going to bike in, needs some more attention. Because if you, for example, want to stay in campsites and the route that you will bike on does not have that many campsites nearby, then you should adjust your route. So asking yourself what type of accommodation you like is a good thing to do before you plan your route in detail. So, if you have decided what type of accommodation you like the most, it's now time to get more specific. Now the challenge is to find accommodations that correspond to the amount of kilometers you want to bike each day. And I say challenge because it can be a challenge to find an accommodation that corresponds to how many kilometers you want to bike each day. This mostly means that you need to adjust the amount of kilometers you planned for the day a little bit. A tip here is to shorten your distances instead of making them longer, because you chose the amount of kilometers that you want to bike in a day for a reason. And even if you have shortened your route or extended a little bit, there's still not an accommodation you like, then you can adjust your route or take, for example, a train to the next available spot. A last tip about the accommodation is to look if they still exist. Because I heard and read about some bikers that found a spot online, and when they arrived there, they found out that, for example, the camp sign was not opened anymore. So yeah, that's nice to be sure that the place is still there, and also if there are still available spots or rooms. Furthermore, I would check if the period that you're planning to bike in a specific area is a high season in that area, because if it is, then it might be necessary to book a room or a spot in a campsite ahead. Now we have arrived by the third step of preparing for a bike trip, and that one is sightseeing. However, this is of course not as necessary as having a route and a place to sleep, but this is, in my opinion, the fun stuff about biking, because it's just really nice to look into what you can do on the route and at the places where you're staying. As you chose to bike a ready-made route, there will probably also be books about the route which give some context, some history, and also some sightseeing options for the route. And in my opinion, I used it last year on my trip to Paris, and I really liked that. I'm also going to do that on my trip to Berlin, and it just gives you an overview of the places that you staying in and passing by. So It's a really nice and easy option to give some context and some information. If you're planning your route yourself, it takes more effort, of course, to collect this information about the area, but I do think it's worth the time investment because, for example, knowing something about the history and something about the culture and also attractions that might be worth visiting really enriches your experience of your bike trip. So I really recommend doing that. And of course, you can also do this research part while being on your trip already, as I did myself also a couple of times. However, I do prefer to do the research before I leave because then I'm also having a lot of fun looking forward to the trip already. In this part of the process of preparation, you have found a route, you have chosen a type of accommodation, and you dived into the places that you're going to visit and already had some fun, hopefully. So now it's time to talk about money, the budget that you have. And as we already discussed, when thinking about your accommodation and where you want to go, you already have thought about your budget. But besides that, I do think it's important to have a day budget as well. And this is, of course, a really personal topic because answering the question, like, how much do you spend in a day on a bike trip, for example, that's kind of an impossible question to answer because it really depends on the way you like to travel. Do you, for example, want to stay in luxury hotels or are you going to wild camp?
No! God, please, no! No!
However, I do advise, if you don't have an unlimited amount of resources, to make a rough day budget. So think about how much do you want to spend on accommodation, how much do you want to spend on food, and how much do you want to spend on the fun things such as visiting museums and things like that, so that you have a general picture how much the total trip would cost you. And that's kind of the same thing as I would do with any other type of vacation. Although answering the question how much a bike trip costs is nearly impossible, I can share my expenses on the trip I will make in a couple of weeks to Berlin. So therefore I decided to make another video about my costs on that trip specifically. So that video will come. Okay, so that were the 4 steps I'm using to plan my bike trips, and I hope this will help you to plan your bike trip as well. Before ending this video, I want to say on a final note that for me personally, preparation is the key. So I would say do enough research to make your trip as fun and stressless as possible. So check, for example, if there are many places on your route where you can find food. Know also how your tools that you're taking with you work. Look at the weather.
1 hour later.
Think about how to pack your bags in the most practical way. All these preparations help to get the most out of your trip. So yeah, again, for me, preparation is key. And then we have arrived at the end of this video. Thank you for watching this video. If you're new here, don't forget to check out my other videos. And if you like this one, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I hope this video was helpful. If there are any questions you have, leave them in the comments down below. And then I'll see you in the next video.